That actually concludes the presentations from the panelists, and so now we will soon be opening it up to the floor to receive your comments and questions. If you have comments and questions, we've asked you to note them and to pass them down to the ends of the aisles, and they will be collected and brought up for us to be able to ask them of the panelists. So please do take your time now to complete those questions and comments and pass them to the aisles so they can be collected. I'd actually like to begin, though, by asking our panelists a question, and that is, we've heard a lot of very impressive comments and perspectives on these big issues that our field faces. And we've seen that by perhaps being flexible and restructuring of products, really taking a different conceptual approach to our clients' needs and understanding this wealth management concept, other factors such as governance, and really looking at simple activities such as staff incentives and financial education and many things that each institution itself can introduce. My question to the panelists, however, is really a broader question, and that is, what can we do as a field overall to address these issues? Because what happens in one microfinance institution actually creates a perspective that winds up influencing how the whole world looks at microfinance. So it's not just a matter of resolving the problems in our own organizations. It's really thinking that how do we as a field collectively work together to address these issues and improve and encourage best practices. So with that, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give us a perspective on what we might be able to do as a field overall to address these issues that are happening at the individual MFI level. Anton.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay. So now comes the difficult task of thinking quickly. I suppose for me the thing that really struck me in this process, I mean, to write this chapter, I talked to, 30, 40 different people in the industry. And had a lot of feedback, a lot of discussion. But what really struck me is we have norms. We have the way that the industry is seen. And this is very much, in the past 10, 15 years, has been very focused on the financials. So when we say, what is a successful organization? When you meet a colleague in microfinance, the first question you ask is, how many clients do you have? What's your portfolio at risk? I think we need to start thinking about how do we change those norms. And the one thing I would really emphasize is quality. Because whether we can achieve all of these wonderful things of diversity of services and flexibility or not is a big question. But what we can certainly do is ensure that organizations do what they are doing well. And one thing that really struck me when I was talking to different people, and as I moved away from this sort of thinking about the problem as being just about too fast growth and commercial focus and financial focus, actually speaking to Carlos Danel from Capatamas, the thing he said to me which really struck was, we don't focus on growth. We do not try to grow as an organization. We focus on quality. And then we grow as fast as we can with quality. And I think we need that if we can change that norm, so we shift from this pure focus on financials to much more emphasis on quality in the industry, I think that would take us a big first step towards these goals.
Thank you for that question, Sherry. I'd argue that we as a field have been doing the right things over the last 12, 18 months, actually starting before Andhra Pradesh. And I'd argue we are doing much better than the title of the session would suggest in 4 areas. I do think there is a lot of experimentation going on the client side, on the product side, and that's critical. Not just paying lip services, but really truly understanding client needs. I think we have done, secondly, a lot of the right things with respect to responsible finance. Anton mentioned the SMART campaign, which has the principles now and is switching to in-country implementation. The Social Performance Task Force agreed on the right metrics. 400 MFIs are reporting to the mix. Again, a lot of progress already made. Thirdly, we are already really experimenting with business models to bring and deliver a broader range of services to far more people at a lower cost. Often that involves the cell phone, which is probably the most democratizing innovation that the world has seen. In a country like Pakistan, cell phones outnumber bank accounts by a factor of 10 to 1 or 12 to 1, if I recall correctly. And then lastly, we need the regulatory environment, both protective and enabling, that makes sure that we can do the right thing by our clients and that we can pursue with the right type of innovation. And again, a lot is happening there. The G20 in Cannes last weekend actually explicitly recognized financial exclusion as a risk to stability. So between client focus, responsible finance, business model innovation, and the regulatory environment, we have done a lot of the right things in the last 12 months.
Thank you, Sherry, for that question. Well, I'd look at it from a practitioner's perspective. I think there's still a lot more we need to do in addition to all that we've done in the past. As I shared, my take on it is we still need to collect evidence. We need to be more research-backed. There's still much more that we need to understand on the causality of the crisis that we faced, and we need to analyze that more. I think one of the mantras that I have these days is to go back to the fundamentals. Go back to the ethos of why we are in this business, why are we doing what we are doing. Ask ourselves that question and embed that in the psyche of the loan officer. And that, I think, is a critical dialogue that we have to have. There's also, of course, the need to build a stronger ecosystem around this issue, whether it's through credit information bureaus, whether it's through responsible finance. That whole piece needs to be further strengthened. And I absolutely agree with Anton, the dialogue around success parameters has to change. When it comes to how do we define success of institutions, how do we define success at the level of the clients, we need to change that debate entirely, turn it on its head. And of course, when things start going wrong, as they did, it gives us an opportunity to actually flex our muscles and expand the bandwidth of the language that we use. I also believe that focusing on capacity building of clients, as we have done in our case, that's helped. That's significantly changed the debate at the level of the client as well. And then, if I was to do one thing, it would be to diversify the suite of products that we offer and place savings at the center of it. And as Tillman said, with technology at our behest, we can actually go fast-track this matter.
Un poco lo presenté anteriormente. Creo que es importante valorar a las instituciones que tienen una función social clara, más allá de la naturaleza jurídica. Empezar a valorar a instituciones que demuestran resultados en clientes. Las generalizaciones están haciendo mucho daño al sector y es importante empezar a promover este modelo en microfinanzas. Más allá de que existan otros modelos, pero es importante consolidar este modelo basado en clientes pobres y vulnerables. También creo que es muy importante contextualizar las estrategias. Creo que hay que empezar a descentralizar las microfinanzas desde el lado de fortalecer capacidades locales para promover procesos sectoriales, pero dentro de los contextos. Es muy importante vincular a las microfinanzas como las políticas públicas actuales, insertarlas en los nuevos modelos de desarrollo para que tengan un rol más importante en estos niveles.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments. We've gotten some really fabulous questions, and there's quite a few of them here. So what I might do is, rather than just asking one question at a time, in order to make sure that a number of questions can be aired and discussed, I'm going to go ahead and read off a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll open it up to the panel, and I'll encourage the panel to select which question you'd like to respond to and recognize that not each panelist needs to respond to each one. And the first question here is, How can we detect over-indebtedness when there is a good credit center or credit bureau? When there isn't a good, how can we detect over-indebtedness when there isn't a credit bureau that's available? How do we prevent over-indebtedness? Next question relates to interest rates. And the question is, can we define a band of reasonable interest rates, X% of above an MFI's cost of money adjusted for inflation? Or is there unrealistic-based objectives around interest rates? So how might be a strategy for addressing transparent and appropriate interest rates? And then thirdly, for setting up a social performance system, how should we start to implement sound social performance systems? So 3 different areas: social performance, interest rates, over-indebtedness, clearly the themes of this conference. I can see everybody is quickly organizing their thoughts in the panel. And who would like to go first? Please, Anton, go ahead.
Okay, I'll take the first and last questions and leave the interest rate. How do we detect over-indebtedness? I think to start with, it's not an easy question, but I would say just a number of things. First of all, as Roshana said, if you go back to the fundamentals, actually groups do play an important role where an organisation works with groups. Very often groups are seen as the source of over-indebtedness, because where groups are determining each other's loan sizes, certainly and the groups are not working well, there's can be a real breakdown in that process. I think we need to recognise it's potentially very costly for an MFI to go and do cash flow-based analysis of every client if they're working with large numbers of clients in rural areas or people with very small loans. So groups can work well if the solidarity is working, if groups really understand their role, if they are taking real ownership of the process and are following through the consequences. So I wouldn't discount groups as an effective way to avoid over-indebtedness. Secondly, I think we do need to, as an organisation, think about how do we assess capacity to repay. And I think that this is an area where we can look at innovation. For example, using savings, if we have good saving systems, if we could use savings as a way to regular savings can be a good indication of somebody's capacity to repay. And thirdly, the obvious answer is how to detect it, talk to your clients. I think if you have a good system of getting feedback from clients and talking to your clients and understanding what's happening on the ground, I think you will pick up the issue of over-indebtedness. Sound social performance systems, there's a lot of talk around how do you build social performance systems. I would just say start with understanding your clients, talking to your clients, getting feedback, identifying what is most important in your organisation and making sure that you have, firstly, the system to monitor if it's happening, secondly, the system to monitor the quality of it, third, information coming back to you about what's really happening on the ground and is this effective.
Thanks, Anton.
I do want to encourage each of the panelists to try and respond to just one or two and not be quite as comprehensive in terms of our time management. Thank you.
Let me tackle then, I appreciate that, Shari. Let me talk about over-indebtedness. I do think, the best thing is to prevent over-indebtedness in the first place rather than detecting it early. And I'd say there are two components to prevention. The first one is, and sorry to sound a bit like a broken record conceivably, but it is the notion of understanding demand. And we have not been as good at that as a field as we should have. The classic microcredit impact story remains true, i.e. the short-term working capital loan to a capital-constrained micro-entrepreneur who earns such a steep return on the underlying activity that they can pay back the pretty high interest rate that's associated with a labor-intensive microcredit model and save some and reinvest. That story remains true, but not every borrower is a micro-entrepreneur, and not every loan goes to these highly productive purposes. We know astonishingly little about this. There is one study out there that tries to estimate segments, if you will, client segments based on livelihood. And that study thinks that roughly 10% of any given market fall into this category of the classical short-term working capital loan. One of the reasons why we have had episodes of market saturation in a number of markets is because we overestimated demand, and the challenge shifted on us much more quickly from just providing access into white space to responsible delivery. So understanding clients is the first line of defense, and then the second line of defense is the governance, is setting, trading off and being very careful about growth versus impact. It's setting the right incentives, monitor that, and make sure the institution follows. In terms of early warning, probably best is indeed to talk to the front line in an anonymous fashion so that they don't feel conflicted as far as their incentive is concerned. The credit bureau is not going to be the panacea. It will come late, it will be a lagging indicator in many respects, and everybody needs to want to use it as well. So understanding clients and setting the right incentives to prevent over-indebtedness is the right way to go.
I'll also talk a bit about the over-indebtedness piece and its link to the credit bureau. There's a perspective that I think we need to add to this. It's the loan officer's relationship with the client. I think that is the imperative, and how we train the loan officer to collect and triangulate information regarding the client. So I think that's one key element that could help us prevent this further. I don't completely agree with Anton that in introducing a simplified version of cash flow-based appraisals is not possible. In fact, we did that at CUSH 3 years ago, and we moved 180 degrees from a purely group-backed microfinance program to an individual program. And we are going to be touching break-even on that methodology by early next year. So again, it can be sustainable. That approach can be sustainable with microloans of $200. It can still work. But you have to simplify it. So I still think that customized cash flow-based approach can be another way of preventing this. And the third tier is really the microfinance sector in the countries or the markets as well. A lot of information sharing can help to prevent this, even if a formal credit bureau is not available.
Primero, en relación a la pregunta sobre el endeudamiento, creo que es importante que los diferentes niveles asuman sus responsabilidades. Los gobiernos, desde una función de control y de protección al cliente, los inversores y los accionistas, para hacer una correcta evaluación cuando pidan metas de cumplimiento, metas de crecimiento, y las mismas IMFs al conocer su mercado. Creo que es importante eso, que ya no miremos solo los ojos en las microfinancieras, sino también en todo el sistema que las empuja a actuar de cierta manera y a sobreendeudar al cliente. En relación a la última pregunta de los sistemas de desempeño social, creo que se ha avanzado mucho en procesos, en herramientas para mejorar procesos del desempeño social. Creo que en el futuro tenemos que trabajar en dos direcciones. Primero, no pedir un impacto global a las instituciones microfinancieras, respetar el enfoque predominante que tienen, no sé, mujeres, área rural, pobres. De hecho, el Foro LAC y junto a otras redes de Latinoamérica estamos promoviendo un sistema de certificación de desempeño social basado en sellos específicos y también trabajando con Microcredit Examen en el sello de pobreza. Creemos que es muy importante eso, la especialización en cuanto a impacto. Y lo último es valorar a las instituciones en función a los resultados que tienen en sus clientes. En un principio todos hablábamos de impacto, después por la dificultad de las metodologías de alguna manera empezamos a dejar de lado este tema, pero el desempeño social solo se va a poder medir y valorar cuando podamos identificar impactos en clientes.
Thank you. You know, this audience has been a great audience because you've given us some fabulous questions. It made my job a little bit more challenging. What I'm going to do now is just ask 2 questions, but I'm going to ask the panelists to each respond to only one because we're really at the last few minutes of this discussion. And one of the questions is, in the case of catastrophes in the country, what type of options exist for MFIs, above all, in those disasters followed by political instability? Oh, good one. And then the other question has to do with dealing with your competitors. Please tell us some examples of norms or processes to combat the bad practices of competitors in your marketplace. So with that, I'm going to ask each of you to respond to just one of the questions and to keep your responses brief to just 30 seconds, a minute each. Yeah. Okay, Fabiola, would you like to begin? Which question will you respond to?
La segunda, sobre eliminar malas prácticas. Creo que se necesitan normas claras y esto se lo puede hacer a nivel de gobierno global a través de códigos de éticas y políticas nacionales de microfinanzas, donde se establezcan algunos parámetros que puedan normar el sector, pero creo que también es importante trabajar a nivel de redes para tener algunas normas de conducta ética sectorial que puedan de alguna manera evitar distorsiones en el mercado.
Okay. Please, go ahead,
I'll talk about the combating bad practices and the role that the sector can play in this. Well, one of the first things that we did in Pakistan was, and this was again 2-3 years ago, was to establish a consumer code of protection. And that was generally accepted by the sector and sector entities. The issue is how do you regulate it, because how do you monitor it and how do you make it more effective? And that is a challenge that we're continuing to work with. The second level of way to manage competition has been the CIB that we have introduced. It's the electronic CIB that we've put together. And again, that's in process. We are testing it in certain markets. Again, a code of lending needs to be substantiated when you introduce things like this. So that is, again, a parameter that we still have to work with. We've also had in the past information sharing, both formal and informal, amongst practitioners to help us combat many of these aspects. And I think the fourth lever of all of this is research. We have an association, the Pakistan Microfinance Network, that has been, ahead of the wave in identifying some of these issues. So we did a research in 2008, if I'm not wrong, on over-indebtedness in certain markets. So that also is a way of helping competition enhance and implement better practices. Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, if Tillman and Anton, if you could speak relatively briefly.
Yep. So I will address the question of catastrophes, or in this case a bit more maybe a shock to the system. I was very, very impressed by the response of many of our colleagues in the Middle East in response to the Arab Spring, which on one level is of course to be celebrated, but for the MFIs on the ground was a huge disruption. What they did and what was really impressive is they kept operating, number one. They stuck very, very closely to their clients to understand their needs. They showed, thirdly, flexibility, and they did seek help in closed ranks, if you will, both as an industry and with the emerging new authorities. And as a result, Tunisia is one example, is now coming up with very, very strong regulation and plans for an enabling environment, which should make the microfinance industry in Tunisia much stronger than it was before.
Just very, very quick my experience working in South Africa with CEF. Our experience in dealing with competition, and some of it with quite bad practices, stealing clients, lending to the same clients, was really just to stick to our guns. Focus on quality, focus on doing a good job, focus on serving the clients well, and hoping that would resolve in the long term. And generally our findings was clients went to other organisations, had bad experiences and came back.
Great. Thank you, Anton. Those were absolutely the words we think we need to be wrapping up with and thinking about as we go back home to our own programs, is the importance on focusing on the clients and focusing on quality and staying the course. Well, with that, I want to thank all the delegates, who submitted questions, and our sincere appreciation to the author of the paper and the panelists for such a useful, engaged discussion. And now, Sam, let me turn to you to make a few announcements.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you to the panelists. Some quick announcements. Don't forget there's a prize, 2 free registrations or 1 for the completed evaluation forms, randomly chosen. And so please take out the evaluation forms briefly right now and evaluate this session and bring it to the other sessions. If you don't have one with you, we're not passing them out. You can go to the registration area and start completing your evaluation forms. So the other thing is the book. Anton's paper, Francis Sinha's paper, they're in a book, New Pathways Out of Poverty. They were printed by the same printer, but the Spanish and French editions of the book have not arrived yet. So we hope that by tomorrow we'll be making an announcement where to come to get the Spanish edition or the French edition of New Pathways Out of Poverty. This session, all the workshops will be on CD, and you can purchase it the final day for €10. And you can sign up for the day-long courses. They start on Thursday. Some are Thursday only. Some go Thursday and Friday. Look in your program for the different day-long courses. We're about to go to a break, followed by 16 workshops, 2 focused on microfinance in industrialized countries, Europe, North America, etc., and then the other 14 focused more globally. And I want to just do this really quickly. Look at the top to see which 5 will have simultaneous interpretation, which is right there. And then you've got your title, but it's the issue of finding the room. And after the room's name, you need to look at the next thing, which is, in this case, CCMD and level 2. So let me just walk you through this. This is, when you go out of this room, if you turn right and go to the right, there's the sala de camera. And then if you turn left, you go to the experimental theater, Teatro Experimental. Those are the 2 easiest ones. Now, if the workshop says Escuela de Danza, the school of dance, then you really want to go out the room. There's another level of school of dance. You go out the room, down the hallway where the exhibitions are, and just before you get to the lunch area, you turn right into the Escuela de Danza, the school of dance, and you've got 2 on that level. We're on level 2. And you've got another on level 1 level down. You've got 1, 2, 3, 6, a level down. So you go out, you go down the literature tables, you go into the School of Dance, and you go down a set of stairs, and they are then to the right and around. The last group that I want to focus on especially are these 5 that say CCMD. You go out the door, down the exhibition, you cut across the lunch area, you go either up the steps to level 3, or you go down the steps to level 1 for those in that CCMD area. And then level 0, you go down 2 levels of steps to get to that room. There's one more, and I'm going to show it to you. It's the Conservatorio, the music conservatory. You go out the door, down the hallway, and then you turn a hard left, and you go through and down the steps to the Sala de Profesores. Let me remind you, after the workshop is lunch. After lunch, the plenary on social business with, among others, Mohammed Yunus and the CEO of Danone Yogurt. And then there will be some associated sessions and a ministerial plenary toward the end of the day, and then the delegates' reception. Please help us adjourn the session. Thank you.